Good morning, everyone. Today we are going over an idea within communication theory known as uncertainty reduction theory. This is pretty a straightforward and to the point idea. I'll use a few examples to highlight it, but overall it should be rather quick and simple. Just take down the key terms, to kind of think through what this means. So this theory was sort of really brought to life back in the 1970s. And what the theorists at the time were thinking of is that uncertainty is uncomfortable. Anytime we are in an uncertain situation, we're uncomfortable and we seek comfort through knowledge, right? Through knowing what the situation, how the situation is going to unfold. So everyday life is infused with uncertainty. We seek out how communication is used to reduce uncertainty between strangers in their first conversations together. All this means is that when you go around and there are things that are either cognitive uncertain, so mentally you aren't sure what's going on, or behavioral, right? People are engaging in some sort of behaviors that you are unaware of. You seek to find an explanation for those behaviors, all right? And that makes you more comfortable in the situation. So that's all uncertainty reduction theory is looking at, is that we use communication, right? We speak, we look for verbal cues, we engage in conversations maybe with people who are local to that situation or who have knowledge about what's going on in that situation. We are communicating in order to seek out what is happening, because being in uncertain situations makes us uncomfortable, all right? And so we seek comfort through communication in order to reduce the uncertainty around us. So you can think about some of the things that might happen in, your everyday life. So if we were in class, we would sort of run through a list of these. Obviously, we're not. So we'll probably talk about some of this stuff next time we meet. But you think about, what are you uncertain about in the following situations? So the first one could be a first date, right? And then you say, okay, what am I trying to figure out about this person, right? If it's a blind date, you might know very little information except maybe the person's name, right? So you're looking for, what do you do, where are you from, what are you looking for in some sort of long-term relationship? Why are they on this date in the first place? Are they just trying to get out there and meet people, or are they really looking for a long-term serious relationship? Right? That'll help you make you feel more comfortable in the situation as far as the date is concerned. But it'll also let you know how you are supposed to behave in that during that date. So if the person says they're looking for a long-term relationship, you're going to behave on that date differently than if the person says, you know what, I'm just kind of out there dating multiple people. Maybe they just got out of a long-term relationship, and so their dating life is more casual. That's going to change and influence the way in which you behave on the date. When you take a new college course, right, at the start of every semester, there are things that you are uncertain about with regard to the temperament of the professor, how hard the class is, how much reading there's going to be. So you start to sort of gather as much information you can about the class before you enter the class, because entering a new class, especially if it's an upper level class, a 300 or 400 level class, it might make you a little nervous, especially if it's with a professor who has a reputation for being, difficult. Seeking out information with regard to how to make that class less difficult for yourself makes you feel more comfortable in the class. And finally, something like a new job or you have a new boss at work. These are uncertain situations. You want to know how should you dress, how should you behave. You see, you got information with regard to how that job operates or who that boss is. So that's really what we're looking for in these types of situations. Is all these situations at first make us a little uncomfortable. They might make us a little nervous. They might give us a little bit of anxiety. And the way to reduce that, to figure out how is it that I'm supposed to behave or engage in these types of situations, you have to find out information about the other individuals who are within that community. You have to figure out other information about that situation, all right? You say, well, how do you find out these answers? You might talk to former classmates who took a class with a professor. If your friend set you up on a blind date, you might ask several questions about that person. We'll go through some other strategies in a slide coming up here, right? But these examples really show us how all of us sort of work through our everyday life using communication strategies in order to reduce the uncertainty with regard to new situations or new people that we are unfamiliar with. We have this model, this sort of tension that kind of that goes on during these communication strategies known as prediction and explanation. Prediction is when um, the person has not acted in any way yet, right? And based on the way that I'm communicating with them, I'm trying to act in a way where I can actually predict their behavior. So if I say, "How are you?" I'm predicting that you're supposed to say, "You're fine, your day's going great," and we kind of move on, right? Um, if you raise your hand in class, you predict that the professor is going to call on you. You see this as a sort of universal gesture for I would like to speak in class. So you behave in a way that is then assuming that the person you're interacting with is going to act in some sort of rational, predictive fashion. Um, if you go out on a date with someone and you ask them, a little bit about their family, you don't expect them to give you a long-winded answer about all the drama in their family. You expect them to say, this is how many siblings I have, these are my parents, this is where we grew up, right? So the way in which we ask questions to people, a lot of us ask questions with the prediction in mind with regard to the limits of how that answer is going to unfold. Obviously, we don't know the entire answer. That's why we're asking the question in the first place. But there's some sort of predictive quality to the bounds of the answer will be within these limitations when I ask this question. All right. So that's the predictive the predictive side of this prediction explanation tension going on. The explanation side is when other people are acting or talking in a way that is unfamiliar to me, what I'm looking for are contextual clues in order to give me an explanation as to how and why they are acting in a certain way. I'm trying to interpret what their behavior means. All right. So when we go out in the world, we're looking at individuals, and we're always and we have this sort of idea that the people that are around us in our community are going to act and behave in certain ways within limitations, right? We don't know every way that someone is going to act. We don't know how all professors are going to act when we take a new class. But we have a pretty good idea of what are the limitations for how a person is going to act and behave within a classroom setting, right? And we act accordingly, all right? If we think about it, there really are like infinite ways a person could behave. But based on context, based on environment, people act within this very small, limited range of ways because it makes it easier for all of us to sort of predict each other's behavior. All right. You do this every day when you drive, right? Multiple people show up at a stop sign at the same time, and someone's going to wave somebody through. You assume that everyone's going to stop at the stop sign. You don't assume that someone's just going to blow right through the stop sign. So the rules of the road are sort of based on predictive behavior for drivers, right? You assume in the United States, everyone's going to drive on the right side of the road. People are going to stop at red lights. People are going to stop at stop signs. People are going to go within some sort of normal range of the speed limit. You don't expect, if it's a 30-mile-an-hour zone, you expect people to maybe go 35, maybe 40, but you don't expect anyone to go 60, right? So the way in which we act on the road has to do with the ways in which we can predict how the other drivers are going to behave within the context of, the rules of the road. Obviously, if you have a vehicle, you could drive any direction you wanted to. You could drive on the wrong side of the road. You could blow through stop signs or traffic signals, right? But the roadway works because everybody who is driving is acting in a predictable fashion, all right? And the same is true if you kind of scale that out to interactions with strangers in large group settings, right? Small little work parties work because you assume that nobody is going to overindulge in alcoholic beverages, right? You assume that people are going to have a polite range of conversation topics, right, that are work appropriate, all right? You know that those conversation topics are different than what you're going to have with your friends. You know that alcohol consumption at a work party is going to be different than alcohol consumption with your friends, right? So a work after hours cocktail happy hour party, one with your fellow employees, it works because people are acting within this sort of range of predictable behaviors, all right? So that's kind of how we move through the world. Every time we move to a new context, we're trying to predict other people's behaviors, and we're trying to figure out explanations for people's behaviors based on the context. All right. Okay. There's this process known as self-disclosure. We'll get more into in a couple of days when we talk about social penetration theory. All self-disclosure means is, how much information are you willing to self-disclose, sort of given the context of the situation. So in the classroom, you are probably more guarded, right? You're not going to give as much information to your classmates as you would, maybe a long-term romantic relationship, maybe some of your work friends and you are close, right? You just recognize that there's different levels of how deep of a conversation you're willing to go with people about your personal life based on the context. And again, we'll talk more about this in a couple days when we talk about social penetration theory. But just kind of know what self-disclosure is, all right? The willingness that you have to sort of go into deeper levels of who you are, right? Superficial, intimate, personal, the core of who you are, right? Based on the environment and the context, based on the current relationship. On a first date, you don't jump right into, all these personal conversations. You mostly stick, rather superficial. For most of your classroom conversations, you're probably staying mostly in the superficial range, right? You're probably not getting real deep, right, about the core of who you are. All right, maybe every once in a while a little personal example will come out, but for the most part, we stay in this sort of outside range. All right. As far as the unfolding of a conversation, in order to reduce uncertainty, right? This is sort of every, freshman college party, right? You have this entry phase, like, hi, how are you? What, who are you? What do you do? What's your job? These are pretty basic pieces of information that most people are pretty okay with disclosing this information. I'm cool with giving you my name and my job, right? If you ask me how I am, it's like I'm fine, I'm good, right? Sometimes if you ask someone how they are and they go into this long rant about that feels more like a therapy session, that's probably an unexpected reaction, right? For a simple "Hi, how are you?" question to someone that you don't know that much. As you sort of figure out the name of the person, you've reduced uncertainty a little bit. So now you get into the more personal phase. So this is defined by spontaneity. So two people who are strangers, or let's say like are starting some sort of dating relationship, they have to play off one another in order to figure out how deep can I go with this conversation. So you work at, such and such location. Tell me more about your job, right? So you're kind of opening a door for someone to explain a little bit more so that it can reduce your uncertainty about who they are. And the conversation unfolds naturally. Now, what might happen during this personal phase is that I might ask a question that sort of opens a door, and the person might give a very short, non-detailed answer, and that tells me this person is not ready to sort of fully go deeper into those layers of self-disclosure, right? So I'm trying to reduce uncertainty. Let's say it's a first date situation. I say, tell me about your family. And the person just says, well, I have like 4 siblings and 2 parents. Okay, the end, right? And that's all the information they give. That kind of lets me know, okay, they're not ready to kind of completely dive into the situation, right? Or if I ask them, why did you move to Philadelphia? And they say, well, I just, I went through a bad situation. I'm not really ready to talk about it yet. Okay, that tells me, all right, the prediction and the explanation tension. Not only, is that a conversation that they're not willing to have yet, but it also tells me that that's a conversation that I shouldn't be having with them either, right? There's this reciprocal nature of disclosure where, as the conversation unfolds, people sort of recognize that I'm only supposed to disclose the same amount of information as the person sitting across from me at the table, right? So if they don't want to talk about their family situation right now, I probably shouldn't go into a lot of detail about my family situation right now either, right? The two people during the personal phase are trying to work it out. How deep of a conversation can they have about certain topics based on how much disclosure the other person's giving about their, right? So it's this give and take during this personal phase. The exit phase that goes on is this question of like, do you want to keep doing this? Now it could be, do you want to keep doing this 5 minutes into a conversation with a stranger at a work party, right? Or it could be, do you want to keep doing this, a year into a romantic relationship? So as you kind of keep going deeper and deeper with understanding who the person is across from you, at some point you get near a bottom, right? Not the bottom, but a bottom. And you might reach a point where the person doesn't want to go any deeper. And they say, okay, how close can we be as friendships, as romantic partners, as whatever, right? If you are not willing to go any deeper with regard to this topic, that should be the baseline for our relationship. So if you're ever in some sort of romantic relationship and you kind of get to that place where 6 months, maybe a year in, the person's like, I'm still not willing to introduce you to my family, or vice versa. For some people, they say, well, if you're not willing to meet my family after a year, right? You clearly don't want to know more about me, or sort of who's a part of my life. And so that might be sort of the exit phase of the relationship. Yeah, so it has to be this constant sort of digging down a little bit deeper each time you enter into the conversation if you want the relationship to continue to grow stronger. Just a couple axioms. This is just out of textbook stuff. You can pause the video and look at these if you want. But really all it's sort of talking about is, as uncertainty is reduced, as we know more about a situation, our comfort level with those individuals or those situations rises, right? So as we talk more, right? As we talk more, we're figuring out more information. That reduces uncertainty. As we sort of engage in these nonverbal behaviors, let's say of a new culture, right? That helps us to reduce uncertainty. Um, High uncertainty increases information seeking behavior. So if I walk into a new situation and I am highly uncertain about what's going on, I might go around and try to find people in charge and ask them some questions about how I'm supposed to behave in this situation. So I'm seeking information during a high uncertainty situation. High uncertainty produces high reciprocity, so I mirror other people. So let's say it's your first day in a college classroom and you are extremely unfamiliar with how a college classroom works compared to a high school classroom. You're very uncertain, and so what you do instead is you start looking around to other students in the classroom to figure out, okay, I need to mirror their behavior. How are you supposed to act in a classroom with regard to college kind of situation? If you move to a new city, right, and you go out to the new clubs and bars and whatever, you're very unfamiliar with that area. You start to mirror other people. How are other people operating, sort of at in this city, that in this new city that I'm in? If you go to a new country, right? If you go and travel, again, high uncertainty. I'm not really sure what to do. I start to mirror other people's behaviors. Okay. Okay, so we go back to I talked a little bit about strategies for sort of reducing uncertainty. The first one is a passive strategy, which is unintrusive, observing from afar, minimally interested. This is just if there's somebody that you work with that you're not really entirely, you want to know more about them, but you're not actively seeking out information. It's like, well, I work with, there's a new guy, down the hall from me from work. If I pass him in the hallway, or if I see him in like the coffee room, it's like it's very unobtrusive. I might observe some of the things he does. I might like overhear a conversation, but I'm not all that interested in getting to know him that much because I don't have to interact with him that much. So there's a passive strategy of me. I'm gonna learn about who that person is, but it's very passive. Yeah, it's just I'm gonna see him in the coffee room. I might overhear a conversation. Maybe I hear him on the phone in the coffee break room, talking to his wife about who's gonna pick up the kids from school, and I'm learning information like, oh, this guy's married and he has a couple kids, but it's not anything I'm digging into deeper. Active strategies happen through third parties. All right. So this could be, let's say you go on a first date with somebody and you don't know much about that person. You might ask your friend about them, or you might, get on Facebook and see if you can find more information out about that person. So you're actively seeking information about that person, but it's not through the person directly. It's through a third party. Interactive strategies is when you are trying to actively figure out information about that person and you just go and talk to them. So, hey, you're new at work. Let me introduce myself. Can you introduce yourself to me? Tell me more about yourself. Where are you from? Talk to me about your family. What are your interests with this job? Whatever, right? So when you go and actually talk to the person, that's known as an interactive strategy. How do you find out about a class you're going to take next semester? You're probably going to find out through what are known as active strategies. You're probably going to ask friends of yours who took classes with that professor beforehand. You might look up things on like Rate My Professor, or various websites that sort of talk about, is this class hard or not hard, right? Some students, every now and again, not a lot, unfortunately, they might just walk into a professor's office hours and talk directly to them. Surprisingly, not that many people use office hours. You all should use office hours far more frequently than you do. But this is just ways we find out about classes we're going to take. Most of us do this active strategy, but it's not as interactive. As far as relationships, there is uncertainty in relationships. There's uncertainty in relationships, kind of, as long as the relationship's going on. All right. Um, we're always sort of there's a lack of certainty about the future of the relationship that we're in, if it's a year, 2 years, etc. So there's always these two questions we're always asking ourselves with one, when and how do you know a relationship is over, right? So what are your deal breakers? Now, most people say deal breakers are like somebody, somebody cheated on me or somebody lied to me or somebody, stole money from me, right? It's like, okay, the relationship's over. But there's other deal breakers that people should, really think about. Like if the person, doesn't want kids, right? If the person, doesn't want to get married and you're, the opposite or vice versa or whatever, right? So think about these sort of like long-term compatibility issues with regard to sort of like long-term goals for each other's lives. So if you're with a person and, one day they're like, okay, we've been together for a year, let's talk about the next step. And they're like, oh, the next step, like I never wanted to get married. You're like, hold on a second, like that might be a deal breaker for you, right? If you're a person who wanted to, get married, have a wedding, have kids, what have you. When and how do you know when the relationship needs to get taken to the next level? All right. So maybe you go out on, I don't know, a dozen dates with somebody. I don't really know how dating works anymore. I'm old. All right. But maybe you go out on a dozen dates with somebody and then you say, okay, like I don't want to date around anymore. Or like I want to sort of just focus on this person as opposed to, try to manage like 3 or 4 people that I'm sort of like casually seeing, right? You might want to focus in and say, okay, I want to, I've gone out on a dozen dates with this person. Now I want to sort of actively just commit to this relationship. I want this relationship to keep going. So maybe that's when you try to make it, Facebook official or whatever, young kids are doing these days. All right. So these are things you just have to think about for yourself. All right. When and how do you know a relationship is over? And when and how do you know you want to take a relationship to a next level? Then you have to act accordingly. All right. But these are things that you need to really focus in on. I do a lot of this work in my interpersonal class, which I teach in the fall. When we do some stuff with romantic relationships. You never want to be in that situation where you're just kind of casually and unintentionally just sort of like falling into your relationship and say, well, me and this person have been together for a while, so we're just going to kind of keep being together. You want to just any relationship you have that's a close relationship, you just want to be very intentional about it. All right. So know your boundaries, know your goals, know where you want to go. And that way, if and when a problem ever arises, you can directly discuss the problem with your partner. Or you can say, here are the boundaries, and if your partner is outside the boundaries of what you are looking for, it doesn't mean your partner is a bad person. It just means that you two might not be compatible if it's a deeper value type of question. All right. But most people just don't know what their boundaries or their limitations or what they want in their relationship. So you just need to do a lot of thinking of, this is what I want in a relationship, and then be very clear and direct with your romantic partner about it, and then act accordingly. And then finally, uncertainty avoidance. There are individuals, you might be one of them, or I guess all of us might be one of them to one degree or another, right? Because there's there's sort of different there's different situations that we might want to avoid in general, right? Some of us might be very active with regard to, I want to seek out information about, and I'm very interested in this sort of like academic endeavor, but I don't really like uncertain environments. So maybe you don't like to travel a lot, right? So there's different ways in which we might really jump into uncertainty because we want to know more about the situation. And there's other situations you might just avoid it altogether. All right. So uncertainty avoidance is our attempt to avoid ambiguous situations. If there is a new situation, you might say, you know what, I'm not a person who wants to get involved with this. That's fine. So you ask yourself, a question like, do you want to travel? Are you social? Are you a person who's willing to go to a new party, to meet new people, to go out on multiple dates? These are all things that you can sort of ask yourself and say, okay, why is it that I am avoiding these things? And some of it might just be because you're not interested. Other might be for, other reasons might be for deeper reasons that maybe you need to talk to someone about. But that's what uncertainty avoidance is. You actively avoid uncertain situations. And if you actively avoid it, you also have to be comfortable with the fact that you will never grow more comfortable in those situations, or you will never be able to reduce your uncertainty because you're actively avoiding it. But you want to make sure that you are just conscious of the fact that you're actively avoiding it. All right. So some people just avoid situations because they don't want the discomfort, and they are uninterested in the discomfort, or uninterested in learning about it. Some people might be avoiding those situations for more emotionally driven reasons. But either way, just know exactly why it is you're behaving in the way you are. Know exactly why it is you're trying to communicate, with regard to seeking out information or not seeking out information. And then, yeah, as long as you can move through life intentionally as opposed to unintentionally, you never want to fall back into this comfortable pattern just because it's comfortable, right? You just want to keep doing things intentional. All right. That's all I have for uncertainty avoidance. I will see you back here next time for our next discussion.